Hello, and welcome back to the Live Label Free podcast. I'm your host, Livia, an autism and eating disorder recovery coach, and today I'm chatting with Harriet Fu, aka the eating disorder therapist and host of the podcast with that same name. Just like me, Harriet has her own lived experience of disordered eating and has gone on to turn her mess into her message as she now helps others find freedom as well. I'm so excited for you to listen to my chat with Harriet, but before we dive in, I want to share a huge announcement. Are you a parent or caregiver seeking to better support your autistic loved one struggling with an eating disorder? Well, I have some exciting news for you. Imagine this. A community where you can learn from autistic individuals with lived experience of an eating disorder and connect with other parents in the same boat as you in real time. Something I've learned through working with many parents through one-on-one coaching is that they want guidance from people with lived experience, but they also want a community of other parents that are desperate to support their autistic child through recovery from an eating disorder. So, me being the passionate problem solver I am, I figured, why not bring my own perspective of autistic-friendly eating disorder recovery together with your parental lived experience to create a program that both supports and empowers caregivers to support their autistic loved ones struggling with eating disorders. I'm thinking live group coaching calls with 24/7 access to an autistically ED-free community and tons more research, resources, and guest experts to help you understand how you can best support your autistic child to full recovery from an eating disorder. But here's the deal. I will only launch this program if there's enough genuine interest, meaning your voice matters. That being said, if you are interested in learning more about this program and potentially joining other parents just like you, please sign up for the waitlist at livelabelfree.com/group. So that's livelabelfree.com/group. I cannot wait to embark on this empowering journey with you and other superhero parents out there. And now, let's get back to today's episode.
Gotta put one foot in front of the other, and you'll be around the corner soon.
Welcome to Live Label Free, the podcast, where you'll learn to let go of limiting labels and embrace your unique brain. As my mom says so beautifully in her song,
Fear is a heavy load to carry.
which is why on this podcast, you'll learn the scientific links between neurodiversity and eating disorders, giving you a deeper understanding of how you can face your fears and become truly free. Together, you and me, we will keep putting
One foot in front of the other.
Welcome, Harriet, to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. I'm really pleased to be here. Really pleased to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. We were just before we started recording, I was just telling Harriet how it's always so surreal to see someone in person when you've been like in touch on social media and on email for a while. And how often, even though you've never met each other, it's like almost this instant connection of knowing that you do kind of know each other. But yeah, I mean, I'm really, really excited to have you here and talk about, the eating disorder therapist. And as all my listeners know, I am just the biggest proponent of lived experience. So I think it's absolutely beautiful and wonderful that, you've turned your lived experience into helping others overcome like their own struggles. So kind of with that said, can we kind of backtrack to the beginning? Can you share who you are, what's your story, what kind of caused you to become the eating disorder therapist?
Sure. Yes, I'm Harriet Frew. I'm an eating disorder therapist. I've worked in eating disorders for 20 years, which is very scary.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel quite pleased, actually. I found my purpose very young. Like I decided in my 20s that I was going to train as a therapist. And and it was from my lived experience, having suffered from bulimia nervosa in my late teens and into my 20s. And, back in the day, there was just not much help available. I mean, I know we're still under-resourced, aren't we, with eating disorders?
Yeah.
There's a lot more awareness now, thankfully. But back in the day, there really wasn't much help available at all. So, my sort of decision to become a therapist very much came out of my experience of struggling with bulimia. I was very much a kind of wounded healer, idealist, thinking I want to save the world. It's very much kind of how I went into it all. And I think I'm really, really sort of pleased with that, really, because I think it really gave me a lot of passion and inspiration and purpose, and came from a very sort of heartfelt place, really, even if perhaps a little bit idealistic and, all of that. But so my experience with bulimia, I was quite fortunate. My earliest sort of years of my life, I had a pretty healthy relationship with food. But my eating disorder developed in my teens. It was quite linked to sort of stuff that was going on at home and, sort of pressures in the family to do certain things. And I was the classic eldest child, the eldest of 4 girls.
Me too, but of 3 girls.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. No, it's interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if it's true for you, but I definitely felt that big sense of responsibility. I did a lot of caring for my younger siblings. And as the eldest child as well, I came from quite a traditional family. My dad was a farmer. He really wanted me to take on the family business. And I was really, really torn, because I was really the pleasing good girl who wanted to do the right thing. But I knew in my heart that I wanted to go to uni and form my own path and all of that. So I guess I had so much conflict around all of that because I felt I couldn't really win. If I followed my own path, I was going to feel guilty and, like I was like letting my family down. But I knew that if I stayed at home, it was going to kill me almost, kind of like kill my soul almost.
Right. It's like your dream is killed.
Yeah, they're so true. So for me, like in a way, like the bulimia was very much, of course, it was about food and body image, but it was really so much more about a kind of deeper issues about feeling that I didn't have a voice. I couldn't be myself. I couldn't give myself permission to be myself. I just felt in this awful trapped place, and the bulimia became a way of coping with that. And it sort of started off with a strict diet. I had a brief phase of being more in an anorexia nervosa sort of diagnostic phase, but I very quickly fell into bulimia, and then it sort of plagued me really for getting on for a decade. But thankfully, I did come out the other side. I recovered, and it has then sort of led me to do the career that I do today. So although back in the day I felt it was just awful and I was sort of raging against my family and raging against life, it's actually led me to, from my worst pain has come my greatest purpose, and it has given me, a direction and purpose. And I feel very fulfilled and grateful in a way for the journey that I've walked today and come out the other side. So that's just a very quick overview.
Yeah, I love that disclaimer of the quick overview, because whenever, someone asks me my story or I'm on someone else's podcast, it's like, share who you are. And I'm like, well, I just wrote an entire book. And it's like, even that, doesn't even scratch the surface of what we went through. And I mean, there were just like snippets of what you just shared that really resonated with me. And number one is, almost now looking back, seeing it as something you can be very grateful for. And you also said the word permission, in that you didn't feel like you had permission to be yourself. And in that sense, an eating disorder, whatever diagnosis or label we choose to give it, it's about, suppressing ourselves and what we know deep in our heart we want to do. And kind of, as you mentioned, with you kind of knowing, like, I want to follow my own path, and then this family almost external infliction of, you need to take over the business, you need to do this. And then I think you and me and, everyone who gets an eating disorder, I think we are innately born people pleasers in a sense, or we've been conditioned to be. And I think that's almost where that internal conflict comes in of, I want to please myself, but I don't have that permission to, so I need to go please other people. But because of that internal conflict and like you feeling that something's wrong, we turn to the eating disorder because it gives us this sense of safety and almost a false purpose when we don't trust ourselves to find that purpose. And then, yeah, kind of fast forwarding to, you saying like this has helped me into become the person I am today and help other people become the people they want to be. I have a quote in my book, Rainbow Girl, that is, here's to turning every mess into a message. And that's honestly, exactly what you're sharing. It's so powerful and I love it so much. So yeah, thank you kind of for sharing your background. And you did kind of touch on, knowing in your 20s you wanted to become a therapist. So I'm curious, when you decided when you recovered from your eating disorder and you were like, I want to help other people with this, were you already training to become a therapist, or was your story kind of the catalyst that prompted you to say, I'm going to become a therapist that specializes in eating disorders?
I guess it was all a bit messy and imperfect, really. It wasn't like, I landed in the land of recovery of rainbows and unicorns. Yeah. And then I decided, no, it was a kind of process, I guess. So I decided when I went to Australia for a year when I was 23, it was really a helpful thing. Yeah.
That's totally on my list.
Oh, you should definitely do it. You should definitely do it. It's, but it was, for me, it was like, having the geographical distance away from things was really, really helpful. And that's when I kind of made the decision that I wanted to kind of come back and train as a therapist. But I was still struggling with bulimia then, but my symptoms were probably not as severe as they had been earlier on. So, but I think what was interesting for me is once I'd made that decision that I wanted to help other people, in a way that became bigger than the eating disorder. It gave me such a reason to really work on myself, so I was very much the wounded healer, working on myself, but, having this greater purpose to be able to support others. So I guess it was a kind of gradual process. And I think the fantastic thing about therapy training is it's not a quick training, is it? You have to do it over several years. So by the time I'd finished my therapy training, I was fully recovered by then. I was still working on some of the deeper issues of self-esteem and people pleasing and identity and all of that, but I wasn't restricting anymore. I wasn't binging, I wasn't purging. I was in a much better, healthier place, basically.
I love again what you just said about that wanting to contribute and help other people became stronger than that kind of still lingering I need to engage in the eating disorder. And that reminds me of something that I talk about a lot with my clients, is almost this misunderstanding in recovery that, recovering from an eating disorder requires you to not have any more fears, whereas it's not about not having the fears. It's about having something greater than the fears, almost overpower them. It's when desire outweighs fear, that's when we move in the direction of the desire. So again, and then, also you mentioning, I was still kind of struggling with the deep-rooted issues. We are all lifelong learners. I still have my issues every day that are not related to the eating disorder, but it's interesting because sometimes when I'm struggling with anxiety or having heart palpitations because I'm I'm overwhelmed, it's in those moments that I realize, and I'm sure you can resonate with this, how far I've come in finding coping strategies, because in those moments where I'm super anxious, I just know that 10 years ago when I was struggling, the answer would have been, okay, I'm not going to eat now. I'm going to go for a run. That's how I'm going to cope with this. Whereas now I'm able to almost take a breath, take a moment to be okay, what do I actually need right now? What is my body telling me? Instead of, trying to numb the pain in something that is a false distraction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it really makes sense, doesn't it? And it's a lifelong journey, isn't it, of peeling back those layers of the onion, I think. We get to a level of awareness and there's always more awareness to get to, isn't there?
Yeah, there's always more awareness. And I think especially when it comes to eating disorder treatment, I have kind of an issue with okay, let me just backtrack. My personal relationship with therapy was during my eating disorder was incredibly traumatizing because the professionals, the people who, I was being treated by did not have lived experience, and they had just no humility for learning from me as a patient kind of thing. And I think, I'm autistic, right? So I don't know if you have autistic clients as well, but
Yeah.
the autism and the eating disorder, when they come together, it makes things difficult and complex, and it doesn't. Well, 100% of the time, it does not match the textbook definition of this is what an eating disorder is supposed to look like. And because I went undiagnosed for so many years, I was just written off by every therapist, like, you're too complex, you're hopeless, you're this, you're that. It was just all these labels, and that was obviously very, very discouraging to me. And I was often accused of lying when I said, like, for example, like, autistic people have really strong food preferences. For me
Yeah.
specifically, I can't eat something if it's not like the perfect temperature.
Yeah.
And I just remember in treatment being like, can I please microwave this? Like, I'll eat it, but I just need to microwave it. And it would be like, that's an eating disorder behavior. You're just using this as an excuse kind of thing. And that gaslighting is just, it's so traumatizing, especially for a child. And yeah, that kind of made me allergic to professionals. And in my own journey, just made me realize, like, that professionals who bring their own lived experience and have humility towards saying, like, I don't have awareness of this. Can you teach me? Can you help me understand so I can understand? And maybe I will never fully understand your situation, but I can bring curiosity and compassion to this. I think that is such an important piece that, so many professionals, I feel like they almost see themselves as higher than that. Again, I don't want to make assumptions because everyone's different. But kind of with you personally and your story, how do you believe that your lived experience actually allows you to be a better therapist and allows you to have that humility, which I just described is so important?
Yeah, well, I guess when you've walked a path with an eating disorder, because it's all slightly different, isn't it, for everybody, but you've been in the trenches, haven't you? And kind of, you have an experience of what it's like. So I suppose you really bring that kind of empathy, don't you, and understanding and non-judgment. And I think, I think it's something that is difficult to put into words sometimes, because I think something that I find with my clients is that, I am able to build very strong relationships with my clients, but it's not necessarily by anything I'm particularly saying sometimes. I think it's a lot about just being able to kind of hold that kind of presence and sort of that kind of container of just non-judgment and warmth and empathy and support. Yes. And the fact that they know that you have been there and that you don't react with judgment to kind of like behaviors, etc. So I guess it really, it's a bit of a kind of gift, I suppose, in the therapy room, isn't it? I think you always have to be careful. Like, I'm very aware my experience is different from other people's as well, and I think that's the thing I really understand as well. Like, every experience of an eating disorder is quite individual. Like, there's common overlapping themes, but I guess as a therapist, it's so important. Like you're saying, you actually weren't always kind of heard, listened to. People didn't really kind of perhaps meet you where you were at and really try to understand your experience.
Have you listened to my free audio training yet? If not, you have got to get your booty over to my website right now and download the audio training, 3 Steps to Recovery from an Eating Disorder as an Autistic Person. If there is one question I get asked the most when it comes to autism and eating disorders, it's whether or not I believe it's harder for an autistic person to recover from an eating disorder. The fact that this is such a common question is really no surprise, as autistic traits are often the root cause of the disordered eating behaviors. I believe my own eating disorder was simply a manifestation of my autism. Obsessive interests, the need for predictability and routine, difficulty with change, being sensitive. As soon as you mix food and exercise into this autistic assemblage of traits, it's literally a recipe for an eating disorder. So then how does an autistic individual approach recovery from an eating disorder? Well, that is exactly what you will learn in my free audio training. while listening, you'll be guided through 3 simple steps to give you the clarity and confidence you need to use your autism to your advantage in recovery. It's like having a private coaching session with me on demand. To listen to the free training, all you have to do is head over to livelabelfree.com/free-audio training, and you'll be on your way to learning the skills to fully recover from an eating disorder as an autistic person. Achieving a state of full recovery from an eating disorder will be a different journey than for someone who is not autistic, but that doesn't mean it has to be harder. I did it, which means you can too. Now, let's get back to today's episode.
And you know, we know in therapy, the relationship is the most important thing. It's not like how skilled you are, how technical you are, how many qualifications you have. So, you know, I guess fundamentally it all comes back to the relationship, doesn't it? And being able to build a safe, trusting, empathetic, warm relationship with a client.
Oh my gosh.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, you just said my 2 favorite words. You said safe and you said trusting. And that is what it is all about. And I'm just loving what you're saying so much, especially that emphasis of it's not necessarily what you're saying or doing or even the tools you're giving the person, because ultimately recovery and, you know, discovering who you are without the eating disorder, that can only come from inside the person. It can't be handed like, here's the pamphlet, how to be your own person kind of thing. Like, how ironic is that? And I think traditional treatment does try to do that of, here's a picture of what recovery is. If you fit in that box, you're all good to go. It's like, that's kind of the opposite approach that is actually helpful. And yeah, I mean, there's, you know, the biggest question in the eating disorder space is like, what is the best treatment for anorexia, for bulimia? What is the best treatment? But I don't believe that any treatment works. I think it's all about creating an environment that is safe enough for the individual to do the work. And that is why the trust and the safety and the warmth and the empathy, and you said that word relationship a few times, creating a relationship of co-regulation. No, I'm the therapist, I'm the professional, you're the client, you're the sick one, but 2 people, 2 hearts and souls, 2 living beings exchanging loving energy. I mean, when you create that almost sphere of healing energy, I mean, the only thing that can come out of that is love. And when love emerges from that, the individual will have no need to, you know, live in a state of fear, because fear and love cannot coexist. So yeah, I just thank you so much for emphasizing that, because I think that is really the root of, I think if all professionals working in the eating disorder space took that approach, I mean, we would go a long way. So yeah, thank you again. So as we just touched on a little bit, we are all, you know, lifelong learners, and as, you know, providers, coaches, therapists, professionals, we're always learning from the people we're working with. We're creating that relationship of co-regulation. So what are some of the biggest insights? And I mean, I'm sure you've had so many in 20 freaking years. That's a long time. What are kind of some of the moments that you were like, aha, like this is so insightful to me, that almost you're working with your clients has given you?
Oh yeah, no, it's been such a big question, because I think again, there's not a textbook answer to that, is there?
Right.
I mean, I think what's really profound for me, you know, some of the things that you're talking about are really resonating, is like when someone starts to self-trust and find their voice and realize their likes and dislikes and their preferences and get back into their body, and, you know, sort of like being able to sort of trust, like whether something feels something to step towards or, you know, not. I mean, I think that is the most rewarding process, when you see someone become their most authentic person. And I guess there are numerous ways that someone can get to that, can't they? I mean, I'm just thinking of a client that I worked with years ago when I was very, very early on in my training. And, you know, at the time, she probably didn't make masses of progress. You know, it just wasn't the right time for her. But she contacted me about 10 years later, and she was living in Australia. And
Australia.
yeah, Australia again. She'd really got into yoga. And, I think I felt, looking back, like a lot of this sort of, I've sown a lot of seeds with her, really, and helped her to feel very seen and understood. And then she'd kind of gone on her own journey, really, not so much down the therapy route, but getting back into her body, doing yoga. She'd been in a healthy relationship. So that's an example, I guess. And, sometimes I feel like I'm part of the journey, but actually, someone is on their own journey, aren't they? And it can be, it's not always conventional therapy that's going to be the thing for someone.
Yeah.
It can be all kinds of things. And I think sometimes it's about, people have their breakthrough more when we've been talking about the past, and they really kind of understand in a way perhaps how they can start to reparent themselves and offer themselves compassion and kindness. I think when people can really get their head around that can be a real turning point. But that sounds very simple, but that's really quite hard to do, if that's a very sort of unusual way of parenting yourself almost.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can just be even the things like doing more regular eating and suddenly feeling just so much more clarity, having more energy, feeling much more present. And that can be a springboard for things. So I guess it can come from so many different ways, I guess, where people have that breakthrough.
I love that idea of planting the seeds, and like the fact that she contacted you 10 years later. I mean, that is so, so beautiful, because that just is such a clear illustration that you did have an impact. You did provide that trust and safety and that empathy that, propelled her forward in trusting herself and feeling more safe to go on her journey or to continue her journey. And it's almost reminding me of one of my clients. Actually, my very first client, I did not yet know I was autistic when I started my eating disorder coaching. And it was through my very first client who was autistic that almost planted the seed in me of, am I autistic? And kind of that, I mean, I'm so grateful to her. And, that propelled me in my journey of niching down on bridging that gap between autism and eating disorders. And it's crazy because now, 3-4 years later, she has told me, like, your content focusing on autism and eating disorders specifically now has just helped me even more in my journey. And I think that's why I love, again, that word co-regulation, and creating that symbiotic energy between two people is like we are helping each other. We as coaches and therapists and providers, we're not just helping our clients or our patients or whatever, but they're helping us understand ourselves better too. And they give us insights to help other people too. Like, it's constantly paying it forward. And I think, that is the beauty of this work, is that it isn't a one-way street. It's a, like I said, it's symbiosis. And I think that symbiotic relationship is just the core of life, and creating a life that we love is having people around us that we can exchange knowledge with and understanding with and empathy with, because we are tribal beings. We do need each other, even though I used to think for so many years when I was in my eating disorder, like, I don't need anyone. Like, I'm good here. I can be all by myself. I can live alone, blah, blah, blah. But now, especially with running my own business and, working from home and not going to the office and seeing people, I am realizing that importance of connecting with people who, share the same passions, have similar stories. And that's why I'm so grateful to be talking to you today too. Because I just feel my energy like going up from this. So thanks again. You have your own podcast, the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast. How has connecting with other people, because I kind of just touched on how that connection is so important, how has for you, connecting with other coaches and professionals and specialists and people who kind of do similar work to you and me, how has that impacted your practice and your approach to helping people?
Well, I guess there's just always new learning, isn't there? I mean, I just feel very privileged, really, to have had so many conversations with many, many, many people who have walked different paths. So I guess, you always learn something new from everyone, don't you?
Yeah.
You really do. And just appreciate the complexity and the depth of these issues, really. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it's just like an ongoing journey of always learning more. And, I've had so many different kinds of people on my podcast as well. So I think that's particularly what really stands out for me is understanding perhaps more about the kind of male lived experience of an eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's something that I was probably less in tune with. You know, just appreciating as well, just kind of like you know, I guess, you know, I live in the UK. Most of my career has been in a kind of treating kind of younger women, kind of white women as well. So, you know, you're kind of a bit more limited, aren't you, in
Very
terms of like
stereotype, yeah.
very stereotypical. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I feel like I'm always learning. And I guess it's interesting you're talking about eating disorders and autism. Several of my clients actually have autism. And actually they're some of my favorite clients, to be honest with you.
Mine too. Yeah.
But so again, you know, that's not so much the podcast, but yeah, I mean, I just feel I'm always learning from the podcast. And I feel like I'm just this channel for the podcast, really, because I think I have so many people that come on who have incredible knowledge, incredible stories. And I just feel like I'm the kind of lucky person, really, that gets to ask the questions.
Right.
And I'm a bit in awe of that, really, because I just feel like, you know, it's kind of this thing that runs itself, the podcast. I feel like I'm the sort of channel for it. But, you know, people approach me, it kind of runs itself. And I'm very grateful to be sort of like, kind of at the steering wheel of it, but also not.
Yeah. No, I resonate a lot with that of like it kind of runs itself. And, you know, for me, like most of the people that ultimately reach out to me, like want to work with me, it's usually like I've listened to your podcast and I feel so seen, and I feel so heard, and I feel so understood. And I think that's why I started a podcast, and I love podcasts so much, is because when you are listening to someone's voice, you know, not for like 1 or 2 minutes, but usually for like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, like you are almost already building that relationship with that person, even though it may seem one-sided. I think that's kind of why I love, you know, when people reach out to me after listening to the podcast, because it's almost bringing that relationship full circle of like, I talked to them and now they're talking to me. And then when we meet on Zoom or in person or whatever, it's like now we're like together, and it's just, yeah, it's like, it runs itself, because like a circle, like it never ends. It's infinite. And infinity is actually one of the symbols of autism. So anyways, I always love when things make sense like that. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. And yeah, with the males, and in my own coaching, I've also learned a lot, especially in niching down on autism and neurodiversity and eating disorders, is also the prevalence of, you know, members of the LGBTQIA plus community, and like how common eating disorders is in that community, when it's like almost this like triangle of like neurodiversity, eating disorders, and like being like LGBTQIA plus. Need to make sure I say it right. Like it is so incredibly common, and yeah, the males in there too. And I think with, you know, all the research on eating disorders, we need more people from all communities being represented in these studies, because if you dive into the studies, it's usually 99.9% of the time it's based on stereotypical thin white women who have access to eating disorder treatment, you know, and have a diagnosis of anorexia nervosa. That's like, and then they draw these statistics, but I'm like, how can you properly draw statistics if you're only studying a group of people that makes up a minority of the population? It's just, yeah, I mean, that really grinds my gears, but that's a totally different topic. So kind of last question before we wrap up, what are your top 3 skills or tips that you use in the therapy room that, you know, some of our listeners could maybe be like, oh, that's interesting, I've never tried that before?
Oh, yeah, no, interesting. I mean, I think fundamentally it's not really a skill, but I think building relationships with people is like, you know, top skill, really, because if you can't do that, you can't really get beyond the first base, can you really? So I think that, you know, that's definitely my number one, really. I think being able to kind of provide a safe space for people. What else do I like doing? I mean, there's so many different things, I guess. I mean, I think what I like really doing as well is helping people understand their past and understand, kind of piece together the pieces of the jigsaw, really, so they can like make sense of their eating disorder. Because I think often people come into the therapy room and they just are so confused about, why am I doing what I'm doing? So I really love kind of working with someone to help them make sense of their story. And I think even if they're not ready then for change at that point, I think, again, it's sometimes sowing seeds, and sometimes someone has to just get that awareness first and almost like make sense of that process, that come to terms with that a bit before they're ready for active change. So I think that's a really important part. And then I think my third thing as well is just, I really love working, well, I have a love-hate relationship with it, I think, but with eating disorders, there's always ambivalence around change, isn't there? You know, because an eating disorder is a coping strategy, but I really like being able to support clients around their ambivalence and to help them really understand how an eating disorder is serving them, because I think they've often, you know, experiencing everyone in the world, trying to help them change, like pushing them to change. And that's not really going to work, is it? Until you understand your eating disorder as a way of coping, it's very hard to change. So I think that's the third thing, really working with the ambivalence and supporting people to feel more motivated, I suppose, and to tap into their dreams and what's really important to them.
Right. Yeah, and that now we're coming full circle again, is like your dreams and your desire has to outweigh the fear. Like that's the moment. Your motivation, which means having reasons for changing, that's when you have a strong enough reason to actually change. And I also loved that you kind of touched on exploring what purpose does the eating disorder serve? Because I think a lot of the time, like for me at least in therapy, it was only focusing on the eating disorder is bad, we need to get it out of your life, but without ever giving space or acknowledging, like, well, what if I'm perceiving this eating disorder as a good thing? What if I'm perceiving it as the only thing that I feel can give me safety? I mean, if you do not hold space for that internalized belief, like, we're never going to invite curiosity to, oh, maybe there is another way, right? If we're only focusing on how to get rid of it, because in the end, like, we need to know kind of, or have some kind of idea of what we do want to actually, again, have that dream outweigh the fear. But if we're only focusing on the fear, we stay stuck in the fear, because where your attention goes, energy flows. So anyways, kind of long story short, yeah, I think, to summarize, you just all that energy and creating that relationship that you started off with, creating love, creating space, opening the floor to curiosity, no judgment. Those are for me too my pillars, you know, to helping someone. So yeah, thank you again so much, Harriet, for coming on the podcast. And I'm excited to come on your podcast in a bit too, so we can, you know, bring autism to the conversation as well, because as we've touched on a few times, it's so important. So with that all being said, can you share with our listeners, if they want to get in touch with you, if they want to learn more, where can they find you? How can they get in touch to work with you, or whatever? Just shoot out all your handles.
Sure. So I'm mainly active on Instagram at the eating disorder therapist _. My website is theeatingdisordertherapist.co.uk, and my podcast is The Eating Disorder Therapist. So I'm fairly easy to find, actually, because Harriet Frew is an unusual name. So if you just put me into Google, you will get me coming up.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, it is an unusual name, but that's why I think I like it, because it's unique. Yeah, because my name is Livia, and everyone almost always asks me, oh, is that short for Olivia? But I'm like, no, it's just Livia. So yeah, thanks again, Harriet, so much for coming on. I will also leave all your handles and links and etc. in the show notes, so if anyone wants to save themselves time, just click the links there. And thank you again, Harriet. I've said that a million times. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and I will chat with you all in the next episode. Bye-bye for now.
One foot in front of the other, and you'll see around the corner soon.
This podcast has been recorded by your host, Liv. This podcast has been edited by my small but mighty Live Label Free team, and the beautiful song One Foot in Front of the Other that you are now listening to was written and recorded by my beautiful mom, Louise Alexandra. I am so grateful for my team and everyone who supports Live Label Free. Together, we are always stronger.